Hey there, my name is Alex. I am the Silver Mont, and there are many mysteries in the lands between, some of which we can reason out and know the answer to, through hints in the game. Other things, however, have no answers, at least for now. After all, there are 2 volumes of art books coming out in the summer, and perhaps later this year the Shadows of the Erd Tree DLC. Maybe these will provide us some answers, but for now, for today, in this video, we're going to discuss some of those topics that have no answers, or at least no solid ones. We'll be speculating, as I think that's largely the fun. And of course, if you have anything you're curious about, do feel free to bring it up in the comments below. And to reiterate, most of these mysteries have no answers, but it's entirely possible that I did miss something, and if you think that's the case, do let me know. In preparation for this video, I asked you guys about some of the anomalies in the lands between that had caught your interest too. So we'll cover those, and well, in fact, we'll start with those. The first of which was this statue. Now, this is one I can certainly see being, well, borderline, because we might well get an answer in the DLC or in the art books for something like this. But people have enjoyed speculation over just what this statue is supposed to represent. 3 wolves and what appears to be a young maiden. Does the fact that we have 3 wolves here bear importance? The lone wolves, chased from their pack, form the first spirit ash most will receive from Mirani, along with Torrent. Could the nameless Tarnished be the same as the former owner of Torrent? And does this tie in with Mikola? Did he present himself as a Tarnished at some point? Or perhaps it represents Albinaurics, who have a close relationship with wolves. There might be a connection with shadows too, Malekith, Blythe, and such, serving as shadows for their Empyreans. But are all shadows wolves? Look at the Beast Regent, Sirash. True, he's not strictly a shadow, for Godfrey is no Empyrean, but I had generally assumed that shadows and Sirash were of a similar ilk, a beastman race, such as those in Farum Azula. Back to the lone wolves, chased from their pack, however. Well, that certainly fits with Mikola's theme of shielding and homing the forlorn, does it not? Then we have the mage or wizard towers, situated throughout the lands between. Who lived in them? And why did they love turtles? Well, sorcerer towers are a common enough trope in fantasy settings. Wizards have their towers from which they can study magic, the stars, and so forth in peace, whilst guarding their realms with wards and the like. Considering how strongly astrology is linked with sorcery in the lands between, that holds up. As for turtles, why, that's simple enough. They are considered wise creatures. Just look at a certain Pastor of Vows. Then, how about the singing harpies or the siren enemies encountered here and there in the lands between? Another topic brought up, and I'm glad it was, because, well, once again, this is one that is fairly easy to answer, in fact. See, there's been a lot of commotion over the lyrics in Elden Ring. The majority of the game's soundtrack for bosses and the like seem to just be nonsense. Some claim to hear lyrics within, but it's my opinion that most of them are just like many of the choir lyrics in Final Fantasy XIV and other games. It's just gibberish vocals. Still, the siren enemies in particular do seem to enunciate rather clearly, and supposedly it is Latin. A YouTuber by the name of Antonius researched the topic, and supposedly the lyrics are as follows. Alas, that land once blessed now has diminished. We, destined to be mothers, now become tarnished. We have lamented, we have shed tears, but no one consoles us. Golden One, at whom are you angry? Should these lyrics be true, they would certainly make sense. They'd also fit with my beliefs concerning the Numen. In short, I thought that the Numen were a dying race. Marika, their queen or a high-ranking figure, claimed the Elden Ring in the belief that it would cause life to flourish. After all, the game tells us the Numen are long-lived but seldom born, like some type of elf. But the Harpy enemies have fallen afoul in some manner. So in short, I think they were Numen who were cursed in some way. They are singing something like a dirge in regards to their tragedy. The Golden One being either Marika or the Elden Beast, for their wish was some sort of monkey paw. Maybe life did start to flourish, but there were unforeseen consequences. And it does seem that with the arrival of the Elden Beast and the Erd Tree as we know it, life does seem to flow into it at its end. Whereas before that, well, something different seemed to occur with life and death, involving the death birds. But that's what I think about the Harpy enemies. Now we can move on to something that has no real answers. The Jailers, as I've called them. Those strange purple glowing snake and ball enemies found throughout the lands between, most commonly by the Evergaols. And if I'm not mistaken, there is zero mention of them anywhere in the game, no item descriptions, dialogue, or otherwise. So maybe we'll learn something in the art book, of which I'll try and pick up if I can find a copy, or at least maybe we'll learn their name. They certainly are stone-like, given they drop stone fragments and the like. Ruin fragments and sanctuary stones come from crumbling ruins of the sky, so you might posit they too come from such, or perhaps they were given energy by those fragments, or they absorb energy from latent sources. The Evergaols, for example, might give off a sort of power that brings them to life, or otherwise draws them close. Despite my nickname for them, and I don't even know what they are called if they have an official name yet, they aren't really jailers, as they make no real moves to stop you or impede your way, but they might be keeping those ever-jailed occupants imprisoned there. We just don't know. Some will explode when you draw near, however. Do you think that's a conscious act or some sort of defense mechanism? Automatic? Are they living or are they akin to robots? Who knows? Next up, there's something that yours truly has been wondering about, namely these. What on earth is that? The closest I can think of would be, well, a fire giant, but even if we look at the last fire giant, he's absolutely tiny next to these skulls. Are they ancient giants from another age, an older age? After all, we know that Plakitasax was a form of Elden Lord long ago, before there were Elden Lords and Erd Trees. Some of the older dragons are rather large. Did the arrival of the Elden Beast sap away energy from these ancient, larger beings, refocusing that energy elsewhere? Did it cause life to flourish by taking it from one life form and putting it into another? Well, that would certainly make some sort of sense if the total amount of life doesn't change, but is instead reallocated. Life and death being constant, just their forms shifting and changing. You will no doubt remember some similar skulls in Ash Lake in Dark Souls. Granted, they were a good deal smaller than most of these. It's very likely these sorts of details are just there to look cool, rather than to mean anything in particular, and that is fine. They add to tone and atmosphere, you see them, and it causes a response. But it can be fun, now and then, to speculate as to what they might be, and I think that is the intent. Imagine fighting against something one of those skulls belonged to. That is assuming they are skulls, and not natural formations that just happen to creepily resemble skulls. Gross. Finally, we have some geometrical or physical aspects of the lands between. First up, water levels in the lands between. Have you thought about how strange they are? There is a huge waterfall on the east side of the lands between, which you can see rather clearly from some parts of the map, like in Caelid and I think from Farum Azula, which means most of the water in the centre of the lands between, that sort of basin or bay, is elevated by quite a large amount over the sea or the ocean. But then think about the shores of the Weeping Peninsula. Then we have Liurnia slowly sinking into its lakes, and deep below Liurnia we have the Lake of Rot, which imprisons the outer god of Rot. to say nothing of the underground rivers. Pretty odd, huh? You don't see too much flowing water on the surface of the lands between. Most of it is stagnant. There are precious few shores which one might approach. The Weeping Peninsula and certain areas in Limgrave and Caelid, but Altus, Liurnia, and most of the other areas are inaccessible through water. Imagine being a foreign power and wanting to, say, invade Altus. Can you imagine how hard it would be to reach Lanedale? And for that matter, where exactly is all that water coming from in that large basin or bay, seeing as it's flowing out through a waterfall, but it doesn't seem to be coming from anywhere? Nonsense physics? Or some sort of underground source that we can't see? Why, for that matter, brace yourself for further nonsense. The lands between, do they exist in a flat world, a flat Earth? This is something I've been thinking about for a while. In short, you can see the Erd Tree from just about above ground, any area in the game. For the sake of argument, the furthest you can reasonably get away from it would be the Weeping Peninsula, a distance of roughly 10 to 15 miles, based on a few calculations of the game world. Keep in mind that's using relatively realistic scale, assuming that our Tarnished is roughly human-sized, which would make the lands between, well, tiny by real-world scale. If the world is supposed to be much larger, but scaled down for the sake of gameplay, then that distance would be far greater than 10 to 15 miles. The horizon should be, in theory, no more than a few miles away, but that's assuming that the world that this game takes place in is similar to our world. And even then, it depends on how high up you are, and many other things besides. The axis of the Earth, how much sunlight or moonlight is present. A great many factors play into it, and considering the longest line of sight in a photograph is 275 miles, seeing the French Alps from Spain, which under normal circumstances shouldn't be possible, well, it's a lot to consider. The Weeping Peninsula doesn't appear to be all that high up, but you can see the Erd Tree without any difficulty. Then you have the moon and the sun in Elden Ring. The sun does seem to exist and moves largely in the way you would expect, setting more or less in the west. The moon, however, does not move. How can it be that the sun, or what appears to be the sun, is, orbiting, whereas the moon is not? Is the moon in a geosynchronous orbit? In other words, does it orbit and rotate in a manner at pace with the planet below, meaning it does not appear to move, because it's moving at the same pace and speed, rotation, as the planet we are playing on? Or are there some deeper mysteries concerning the sun and moon? I am going to assume that the planet is orbiting the sun, and, well, the moon is orbiting the planet, but again, we don't know for certain because this isn't reality, it isn't Earth, and it is worth pointing out at least that the moon, which is very close, by the way, does not move, and the sun does. And I'm sure you've noticed the odd markings on the moon, which almost resemble the Elden Ring at times. Or how about the extra moon up on the Moonlight Altar? Is that the dark moon? Is the normal moon the greater will? Is the sun the greater will? Probably not, but, well, in regards to the sun, we have the eclipse mentioned in Castle Sol. How does the eclipse protect against destined death? How does the sun surrendering to the eclipse grant life to soulless bones? It may have a connection with the Deathbirds. Maybe the sun is somehow related to the Greater Will, or the Elden Beast in some way. It may have a connection with the Deathbirds, who seemingly served an important, if malevolent role long ago, and they serve their own outer god mother. But maybe these are things we'll learn more about in the DLC. I sure hope so. Miquella is wrapped up in so many plots and mysteries after all. And of them all, the sun and the moon and these geographical aspects of the lands between, those are the most interesting to me, even if, again, it is likely just a gameplay thing that we can see the Erd tree from just about anywhere. But, doesn't stop me thinking about it. Can't go round the world, Dutch, because the world ain't round. I'm a flat author. But that about does it for now. Are there any aspects of Elden Ring's world that you find yourself thinking about? Do let me know. And until next time, thank you so much for watching, and take care.